Hello, I'm Nan Geschke, your host of the Los Altos History Show. Tonight we're very fortunate to have as our guest Dr. Bert Giroux. Welcome, Bert.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much I really appreciate you being here. Dr. Bert Giroux is a retired anthropology professor from Stanford University. He began his association with Stanford over 45 years ago. Bert's work concentrated on the results of archaeological digs in our local area, and the information obtained from these excavations has provided insight into the lifeways of the indigenous people who lived here hundreds, perhaps thousands of years ago. And before we start talking about your work, Bert, would you please tell us how you first got interested in archaeology in the first place and how you started to pursue our local archaeology?
Well, I suppose it was connected with my family. My father was a sculptor and in the classical tradition, and we had many photographs of Greek and Roman statuary and so forth. And as a child, I used to read about King Tut's tomb. I think it was opened up when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I read a National Geographic article which had all those pictures of that. And as time went on, I always thought that I would end up as a classical archaeologist. And so
your father was very interested too in
well, not so much in the archaeology, but he was very much involved in what the Greek and Romans did in the way of sculpture. And he was developing some of their techniques, like the Los Wax process for casting bronze. And so as a young fellow, I helped him in his shop. We had a shop in the backyard of the house, and we went through various stages of being able to prepare the molds and then getting ready to cast them in bronze, and that went on all the time I was home. And
so did you, when you went to the university, were you already geared up to?
Well, I went through school normally, but I was always interested in that sort of thing, and I prepared myself, I suppose, because in high school I took a course in iron casting just to be able to know how metallurgy worked and so forth. And then when I went to UCLA, I continued my studies in language. I majored in Greek and minored in Latin. And so it went on like that way. And then in the process, anthropology came to UCLA, and I took a field course in local archaeology there. As a result of that, Ralph Beals, who was my sponsor, he suggested I go to Cal to do my graduate work. And when I got to Cal, well, then that was as an anthropologist. And
so how did you become associated with Stanford?
Well, it was a process whereby I arrived in Berkeley around 1938 and started as a graduate student in anthropology. And then the war came, and I was away from 43 to 46. And then I can resume my work towards getting a doctorate in anthropology. And my former executive officer on Tinian in the Pacific, he was associated with Stanford in the Hoover Tower, teaching young officers how to become acquainted with the Pacific. And at that time, Stanford was beginning to think in terms of having anthropology, and they had selected Dr. Kesey to be chairman, and the contact between my former exec officer in Tinian and Kesey led to my being invited down from Cal.
So you were actually in one of the founding members of the archaeology or the anthropology department.
Yes. There was only at that time Kesey was chairman, and another young fellow by the name of Bernard Siegel. He had been brought out from Chicago. He's a social anthropologist, and I was trained more in the broader field of anthropology, which included physical anthropology as well as cultural anthropology, but with more of an emphasis on the historical. And it also included archaeology, that is prehistory.
So that sort of was your interest all as you developed in your anthropology career?
Yes.
So when this dig came up at University Village, how did that all occur?
Well, as a result of the war and after it, there was a shortage of housing in the area, and people like Barrett and Hilp were developing housing tracts around here, and he was apparently purchased a property down by East Palo Alto at the end of the San Francisco Creek, and that became University Village. Well, this is around 1952 that they started, and they were developing streets down there. At that time, there was nothing down there except just pasture land. So they developed streets, and they put in sidewalks and the utility lines and all that. Well, as a result of that, they encountered evidence that this was not a recent habitation, that there were earlier people that had been living there, and those, of course, were the Native Americans. And so they contacted the university with the idea of we would be interested, and we were, and I was selected because of my particular training to go down there and investigate. And the end of it was that I decided to take students down there and excavate, which we did during the summer of 1953. We'd done a little bit before that, but the main work was done over the summer months.
So about 3-month period then.
Yes.
Now, I know that you found many burials in that area, and we don't have any slides of the burials, but with these burials, there were a lot of artifacts that we're going to be showing slides of in a few seconds. How old were you able to determine how old some of these artifacts were?
Well, initially, I made contact. This is by chance. I was acquainted with the people at the USGS, which was located there in Menlo Park, and a man by the name of Culp had come out from Columbia, and he was developing a lab at Columbia University in New York, dealing with carbon dating. So I was attracted by that, and he was sufficiently attracted by what I was doing that he offered to run some dates for us. So he ran 2 radiocarbon dates. One was for about 2,700 years ago, and the other was 3,400 years ago. So those were the first 2 dates. Then subsequently, after I actually worked towards some sort of a publication of the materials, we ran something like a total of, including those 2, some 16 dates, which ranged from around 700 BC to about 14 or 1500 BC.
So the oldest artifact could have been 3,500 years old.
That's right. I would say we averaged all of these 16 dates and it came out around 1250 BC.
Right. Well, I think we have, I believe we have some slides that you were generous enough to share with us. And we're going to be bringing up those on the monitor right now. And I think that first one, Bert, is of the map.
The area, yes. So,
and that's the area where the University Village is located in East Palo Alto. And what area,
well, on the map where it shows Pulgas East Base Monument, the monument isn't there anymore, but at the time this map was made, there was a monument there. And it was in the immediate vicinity of that monument that we found most of the materials that we excavated. And then the residential area extended quite a distance around it and extended down to Bay Road. Then earlier, at the time that the village was occupied, the Indians lived along the lower course of the San Francisco Creek. Well, the creek at the present time debouches from the land way over to the right there. You can see where it swings around. But earlier, we could see evidence where there was an old channel leading from a distance about a mile back from the present outlet, which left a definite kind of a valley that could be followed down right through University Village. So we knew that at one time these people were living along the banks of the San Francisco Creek.
Okay, so their main village, though, was closer to the bay.
Yes, yes.
But and they would travel back and forth.
It was only a couple of hundred yards from the bay, and actually now even it was at that time only a couple of hundred yards.
And then they would travel up into this area, for example, for the
Well,
acorn.
that would apparently the main village was there at University Village, but in that vicinity, as you might suspect, it was mostly marsh grass or meadow at best. You had to go some distance back towards the hills before you got into the oak forest. And of course the oaks provided acorns, and these would be harvested around September to October every year. They collect them and put them in granaries.
Now this next slide, Bert, I think is of acorn crushers.
Yes, that's a fundamental tool that they have to prepare the acorns. They serves as an anvil, and there's a rock, and it has a little pit or a little hole, and it doesn't go through. It's just an indentation in the stone. They place the acorn there. Then with another rock, they crack the shell and take the meat out, which they then put into a mortar. And
I think we have a slide of that mortar too. And this mortar is one that is an early one, you said, because it's not really shaped like some of the later ones.
It's shaped by use. In other words, there's a depression for the pestle to fit in, but the outer shape is the natural rock as it occurred. It's only later in time that we find that they would shape them in cylindrical form with a flat bottom, much like a flower pot. So the nutcracker would be important to get started. Then you need to grind up the meat into a kind of a flour.
A flour, and that was kind of their staple.
Yes, and then because the acorn in California has tannic acid and is bitter, you want to remove that. So they would leach this gruel or mush, and eventually, after washing it several times, they would get it down to the point where they could eat it. And then subsequently, it would be cooked in...
Have you ever eaten that?
Yes, yes. It's I visited.
What does it taste like?
I visited on some of the reservations. And, it's sort of like eating hot dogs at the beach with a little sand thrown in.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because these mortars, most of them are rather soft, sandy material. And
so some of that material would come off.
It comes off, and there's no way of extracting it except by eating it.
Right. Now, this next slide is of what you called a donut weight, and you said that they were actually sort of rare.
Well, we only found one of those at this site, but they are rather common in other areas. They may have had some religious significance because of their scarcity, or on the other hand, they could be used as a net weight in the process of catching fish.
Mm-hmm. And now this next slide is what you called, or I call a crescent stone, but you had...
well, crescentic stone. And they are extremely interesting because of their rarity. In the Bay Area, only one other stone like this was found previously, and that wasn't in any clear context. It was apparently came from some area in Oakland, but not in a burial site or habitation area.
And so what was the significance of this crescent
Well, it's very widespread in California,
yes.
and one of the common features in California was to have a girl's puberty ceremony. And we don't know from here, but in Southern California at the time of the Spanish and later, there were Indians there who used a crescentic stone like this in connection with the girl's first menses. And the very fact that they're so widely distributed in California suggests that they are a remnant of the girl's puberty ceremony.
I see. Now this next slide is one of a set of what you called charm stones?
Yes, yes. Oh, well, the term is inferred from the fact that in modern times, the Indians would hang them up in oak trees and whatnot to promote the increase of acorns.
Oh, I see.
And so they're sort of a fertility symbol. But there's a change through time. The early charm stones are made out of this green schist, which it can be polished and usually is drilled at one end to suspend it. And whereas in later times they were made out of gray sandstone, which wasn't very decorative, and they merely tied cordage around the one end. I
think there's the one that's up on the screen now is the single charm stone.
Yes, well, this was one of the larger ones of the series that we found at University Village, and it seemed to deserve special comment because if it's
looks like it was almost 6 inches long.
Yes, it's quite long, and it was beautifully made.
Now this next slide is of the two fish gorges, which are kind of interesting. Were they like hooks?
The Indians in this area did not use what we would call a fish hook, but they used these bipointed bone pieces, which could tie a string around the middle or cordage, and then it'd get caught in the fish's mouth, and they'd haul it in. I suppose it wouldn't be as secure as the regular type of hook that we use.
But they were able to fish with it, and it worked well for them.
Yes.
Now this next slide is of the Monterey chert, I guess you said it was.
Yes, it's a point. We refer to them as points because we don't know frequently whether they're used as spear points or they're arrowheads. We usually assume that the bigger ones like this couldn't have been used as arrowheads because they're just too hefty.
So they were more like the tip of a tool?
Tip of a tool, and this one you have called an apiculate tip. It's sort of a needle-like tip, and this could be used as a drill so that you make shell beads with it.
Right. There's another slide that's come up on the screen too that shows you a series of those tips, and there's several of them that have more pointed ends.
Yes. Well, this shows the range of materials that were used. They used chert and chalcedony and quartz. It's only in the later time that we have an abundance of obsidian, which didn't come from this area, but was traded in from Northern California or from the Sierra region.
So these were prized then?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so you would the Indians would really actually use these almost as precious tools then.
Well, yes, the material, the Monterey chert came in from around Half Moon Bay.
Yeah.
It's available there. You can pick it out of the cliff.
Right. Now this the next slide is of a series of abalone beads.
Yes, so these were referred to as abalone pendants, or they're made from the Haliotis shell, which is a large mollusk that occurs all along the Pacific coast.
And they look like they're drilled.
Yes, well, they would break a piece out, and then they would shape it to the size that they wanted to. In later times, they're more elaborate. They're almost shaped as figures. Some of them we refer to as banjo ornaments. These early ones are crudely or roughly pentagonal, and they have one or two perforations in them.
And I think the next slide is of an actual abalone bead. And it's, of course, it's not this large as it looks like on the screen, but it gives you the detail.
Well, these were used as beads or sequins that could be fastened onto some sort of a background, whether it's fiber. They have this nice iridescent quality to them, mother of pearl technique, and so they're appreciated.
And that's next slide then is of some, I think, olivella beads.
Yes, these small olive, you might say, the natural form has a tip on them, and then you could take and rub that tip until it wears off, and then there's a natural perforation that goes all through the shell, so you can string them in that fashion. Or you can break part of the side wall of the olivella and shape them in a rectangular shape, just as you did the abalone bead.
Yeah. And that top row shows the sort of that square shape when it looked like a drilled hole. It looks like a drilled hole through it. Right. Now this next slide is kind of an interesting one because they look like, I don't know, they almost look like knives, but you call them rods.
Oh, well, these are asbestos rods. So there's this is the natural formation in which the asbestos occurs. This would have to be traded in from some locality around here, but it wouldn't necessarily occur in this area. These would be polished, and they have a nice natural tinkling sound, and they could have been attached to their bodies, and just walking around would give a pleasant musical quality.
Interesting. So this next slide too, I think you said could have been a musical instrument.
Well,
this a bone whistle?
Bone whistle, yes. In later times, they had long bird bone whistles. This happens to be a mammal bone whistle. It's much sturdier, but nonetheless it indicates that they had this musical instrument. This is probably apart from some sort of a rattle gourd or these tinklers that I mentioned. This would be the only other musical instrument that they've had.
So they could have used that in some kind of a ceremony.
Yeah.
And this last slide then is looks like a crystal bead of some sort.
Well, frequently quartz crystals would be collected by the medicine man or the shaman, and this would be a signature of his trade. He would have a number of these that give him power. Now this one looks like it may well have had a utilitarian purpose because the facets, they're all rubbed off, as you can see.
Yes.
And this may mean that this could have been used to make that hole in that donut stone that we saw earlier.
Right. So this something as sharp and as dense as this.
So it's a hard material.
Yeah.
So you can get started, and then it'll just keep turning it. You can
wear
actually
it down.
wear a perforation through a softer stone.
Interesting. Now, Bert, in your dig, were there any surprises? I mean, what was the most surprising artifact
well, we
that you
referred
found?
to earlier these crescentic stones.
Yes.
I hadn't expected to find those. The other things that you've seen, they occur widely throughout the state. But the crescentic stones have a much more sporadic distribution. They don't occur in the major portion of the valley, and they don't occur in the Bay Area except this one that I mentioned from over to Oakland. But they are found down in the Santa Barbara region and in the lower San Joaquin Valley and down in San Diego County. And we know from historic times that the Indians in San Diego, they used them in connection with the girls' puberty ceremony. And at the first menses, these would be introduced as part of the ceremony.
Now, we call these Indians now Alonis. I mean, that's kind of a modern term.
Yes, yes.
And the Spanish had another word.
Well, they call them the Costanoans, the coastal Indians.
Costanoans.
Yeah, Costanoans.
And they were kind of different kinds of people, weren't they?
Well, the Costanoans represent one branch of the Penutian stock, linguistics family in California, and that's located centrally, where the another group or stock is known as the Hokan, and they occupy the margins and the islands off the coast. And I was generally believed that this is evidence that the Penutian people came in later and replaced the Hokan speakers or pushed them back towards the edges, as it were.
Interesting. Well, believe it or not, we're almost out of time, Bert, and it's just been a fascinating half hour with you discussing, this very interesting dig that you had and so significant to our local understanding of what happened to the indigenous people. And I thank you so much for joining us tonight to discuss your very important life's work. And you've enriched our understanding of the Costanoan or Ohlone people and have made a wonderful contribution to our Los Altos History Show. So I thank you very much, and thank you, our viewers, for watching the Los Altos History Show. I hope you join us the next time.
Yes, well, I appreciate your inviting me.
Thank you.
Yes.